Hello, 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 and welcome to this week's Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, where we talk about everything diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I want to start out this session. There is a lot happening in the world right now, and in particular in the last 24 hours. Check in with the people in your life. Check in with your teams, and just make sure that you are offering the support that people need, and just letting them know that they are seen, and that you recognize and see the bigger things that are happening in the world. Now we can jump in to this week's session, and I'm really excited to have Deb Gran joining us. Deb and I have worked together over a couple of different organizations now. And I remember the first time I was in the room with you and your team at your last organization, Deb, and I just went, wow, like she is the real deal in terms of strategic HR and creating organizations where folks can thrive. And that got acknowledged this last week before you introduce yourself. So Deb and her team at DiaSorin were just recognized as the Twin Cities Society for Human Resource Management HR Team of the Year. And that is so well deserved because I've seen what you all have been up to. So congratulations on that. And with that, I'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to be here with you. And as you said, we've known each other for a while. I've learned so much through our time together, our conversations, and working with our team. So it's always a pleasure to have any type of conversation with you. As Mo said, my name is Deb Gran, and I am the Corporate Vice President of Human Resources for DiaSorin. We are part of a global organization, a diagnostics company that's actually based in Saluggia, Italy. And our North American headquarters and locations are in Minnesota, California, and Canada. And my job, even though I have just a big old fancy title, it really is to ensure that the people side of the business is aligned with the business strategy, and at the same time that it supports the needs of the employees. You know, whether it's through our benefit programs, our communication strategies, our organizational development, you know, kind of that heart side of the organization, mirroring those two together. And so that's what I've been working on. I've been with the company about 18 months now, and we've been going through this journey like many people.
Yeah, hit the ground running.
Yes.
And what I love about your background, Deb, is you've worked in some of the largest organizations in the world, in strategic HR leadership roles, and then smaller organizations. And so you've sort of seen it all, experienced all, many different industries. I'd love, what's worked, no matter the company, no matter the industry, to really create workplaces and cultures that allow and build inclusion and allow people to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, when you're as old as I am, you have opportunities to have worked for a lot of different places. So I've had the advantage of having worked for smaller organizations and also larger organizations that were maybe part of an acquisition. And I think there are a couple of things that work in any size of company. I think, you know, first of all, first and foremost, it's you're never there. You know, you always have work to do. And a big part of the people and the organizations that I've worked with, I think that understand that you make more progress because you're open to the ideas that we're not perfect, and we're not focused on, you know, a quota or something that we need to accomplish. It's broader than that, and it's more in, you know, everybody being able to bring themselves to work. And so I think a couple of things work in any size of organization. The first one is really setting the tone for the entire company. You know, I can give you an example at, you know, DiaSorin. One of our values is uniqueness, and however you interpret that uniqueness is something that we can use to help build, you know, the inclusion part of our organization. And the team this year especially since we've been doing a much deeper focus on it, since Black Lives Matters have really raised awareness this year, in particular in, the summer months. And we're located not far from Minneapolis. So
Right.
a lot of that has been really relevant for many people, but of course for our organization. And how do we now define what that uniqueness is, and how can we use that to build something? So I think number one is having a statement or something that the company and employees and leaders can kind of grab onto. I think secondly is also yeah.
That, like, thinking about that, as you said two things there, it's both an anchor and something to build from.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's like, oh, we're just going to say that, but I love we can always go back to it.
Yep.
And then create systems, process, interactions based on that. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The HR team has done a really good job of, as we worked on developing a deeper strategy for our inclusion efforts for 2020 through 23. And they did a really good job of stepping back and saying, we're not quite there yet because it's really not mapping to the uniqueness part. So they went through it again. We looked at it. We weaved uniqueness into it, because I'm a firm believer that when you have a common language there, that you can make more progress. You can get more people involved or aligned. Sometimes people think it's just a fancy word, but this way it's driven and you can continue to talk about it. So
I love even that it was like, what, we're not quite hitting it, because if we're saying this as our anchor, how does our strategy connect back to that? Awesome.
Yeah,
okay. So I knew there was more there. I just wanted to.
I also think that, as I maybe said at the very beginning, sometimes the companies that I think have made progress in this area are the companies that understand it's an evolution and it never ends. That it's okay. We're not going to just do a plan and then everybody's going to, design this plan and follow and check off these goals. It's good to have a strategy in writing, but then you may also have to change that strategy based upon what's happening in the organization. And so much of this comes from the openness and the conversations that happen, and you can't always force those. Now, you can say that, it comes from the top, but I also believe that inclusion is not just a top-down initiative. It starts there, but it has to have grassroots everywhere within the organization. And so, it's having that ability to know that we're making progress. And I think the hardest part, and Mo, you know this because you've talked to us about this before as well, the hardest part is saying when you've made mistakes. And we've made some mistakes. We didn't jump in as quickly as we should have. We didn't answer the way our employees wanted us to answer. And the thing that I think has helped us is, we've told ourselves, let's not be defensive, because we've appeared defensive at times, and let's listen and let's go back, or build on it or something, or even just take it in that we didn't deliver on what our employees were asking for. And honestly, that's probably one of the hardest things to swallow, that you think you're delivering and then all of a sudden it's like, well, you weren't out there quickly enough. We were expecting this. And in some respects they were right. So it's taking those lessons and then readjusting along the way.
That's so huge.
Mm-hmm.
I know that folks that watch this series, and I always talk about 100% mistakes are going to be made. It's what you do next.
It's so hard to talk about,
team, right? Modeling that vulnerability and really being open and hearing it and not sort of pushing back on the defensiveness, but okay, how could we do better? Mm-hmm. And how do we, if there's anything to repair, how do we repair and move forward? I can't tell you, there are fewer leadership teams and organizations that are able to do that than not, right? And so I think that's, when I think about the thread that I've seen from the work that you've done at various organizations, it's always been this, we're going to make mistakes. Let's be open. Let's learn.
So. I think it's probably part of the most difficult piece. And
Absolutely.
you
Nobody
again
wants
kind of
nobody
your
wants to say they were wrong.
yeah, and you're vulnerable. And, one of the leaders that we had did a fantastic job with that. He went right out into the population of employees when we were told, hey, you're not telling us what we want to hear. Let's be clear. And, he apologized and said, here's what, you need to hear, and you need to know that I believe this,
Yep. Yep.
and so it's just kind of listening to that. I think the last thing is too, which is somewhat not planned, but I think ultimately works well in driving cultures, is making sure that there are a strong encouragement for collaborations of teams outside of the core team. When
Ah,
I saw in one of my organizations that kind of cultural piece changing, I noticed it was when we had a lot of interdepartmental projects and things that are working. So it was no longer them and us. It was teams that were working together, and the positive result was not only getting the project done, but to really see that interaction between individuals lifted things so quickly, so much more quickly than we could have if we had truly planned it that way. I think that's something that I've seen a couple of times work really, really well.
so not having it live in HR,
Yeah.
right, but live out in the organization.
Hmm.
So what role does leadership play?
Hmm. I think that's always a good question. And I think many times people think it's just leadership, or leadership thinks it's HR, or it's nobody, and I think in terms of most any people related uh, portion of your organization, programs and so forth, it's always a layered approach. So I always start at the top. I think that, you have to have an initiative, you have to have a mission or what we want to accomplish, even if what you're looking for is not necessarily completely tangible.
Hmm.
For instance, it might be, I want to create a more open organization where people can come to work being themselves. How are you going to measure that? Many times we want to have something very succinct, but if you start with that, then we have to ask ourselves, what do we need to do, next to make that happen? And so I think for leaders, it starts there, but I think it's also, HR and other leaders, if you have a communications manager and so forth, can help facilitate the conversation.
Hmm.
But we don't own it. I think for HR, a lot of times we make the mistake, not only in these efforts, but in other efforts, that we're the owner or the police of whatever's happening. And really, the organization is our customer. And so we can help guide them and give them tools. And if we have greater experience in that area, share the goods and the bads. But ultimately, it's an organization. So it can be, an HR helped deliver or driven process, but then also employees. I think that there is the individuals have to feel, comfortable knowing, number one, that it's a journey,
Yeah.
but it also has to be an organization where they feel like they can speak up, and that takes a long time in many organizations, and some people really don't want to ever speak up. And so as leaders, you need to make sure that you encourage that, and we don't become defensive, because sometimes that happens first, and that we keep pulling that, forward. And I'm really happy that, as I said earlier, maybe we didn't do everything right from a communication perspective, but we heard from people. And that to me was a big step. It was like, okay, let it hit us in the face and let us step back and reevaluate. Maybe the story doesn't change, but you're getting that feedback as well. So, to your point, I think everybody in the organization is responsible for it,
Yeah, so
because
let's talk about individuals then,
yeah.
right? We can't, so from the leadership standpoint, and then what's my responsibility showing up day in and day out?
Yeah, absolutely. Because every employee is working with somebody else, and it's how you show up as an individual, what you're communicating, how you're collaborating with others, what you're saying to your manager, what you're saying to your teammate. All of those pieces align us with the internal friendships that we can have that can make it a better workplace, as well as if something that is happening that is not helping that develop, how do you then have that voice that can help bring that forward as well? In our organization, the one that I'm currently in, we have the pleasure of having a workforce that has a very long-standing team. So we've had people that, this is the only company that they've worked for, and that's something for us to be very proud of. On the other side, though, it does make it more difficult sometimes for new people to come into the organization
Uh-huh.
because you have, all these unwritten rules. You have, well, that's just Deb and that's just how she is, types of things that, we forget that, it may not be the way in which we want to do business today or the way in which we want to welcome new people into the team. So we've seen a little bit of that progress, certainly in that area, as we've grown over the past year and brought in new people to the organization. And we've been trying to have those conversations, certainly with the new people coming in, saying, look, this is an established organization, so you're going to have to help us figure out, maybe where some of the roadblocks are so that we can help, tear those down and communicate appropriately as well.
I love that we always talk about that as fresh eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
When people come in with fresh eyes, they can see things and they can, and especially if you're inviting that conversation, right? To say, we aren't it's how we've always done it, right?
Right.
And that
Right.
goes back to this journey and evolution. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's interesting, Deb, what you were just saying, and I know you and I have had this conversation about how leadership really sets the tone around diversity and equity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your systems, your processes, your pay, your promotions, and then individuals, including leaders, right? That is where we really build the inclusion and belonging, right? With how we're treating each other day in, day out, you know, micro affirmations instead of microaggressions, right?
Yep.
Allyship, sponsorship, all of those things.
Yes.
So it's been an absolute pleasure to watch the last 18 months that you've been with Diastore and all of the things. You have a phenomenal team
It's a great company.
and all of the things that you've done over the past 18 months. So even just share a few of those, Deb, some of the things that you've put in place that you've seen to be really effective.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's always a journey. And so, we're just at the early stages, I think, of a lot of development things. But I would say there's a couple of things that have helped us stay focused on the areas that we want to help develop the culture and the move forward part of the organization. So, and some of this has come as a result, of COVID as well. Not from because we're a diagnostics company, but not from that perspective, but what COVID has done to people in the workplace that has helped perhaps, increase some efforts that we're doing as well. So I think, number one, when we really started to focus on the diversity and inclusion efforts, we spent almost the last 12 months really focusing on our talent acquisition and our recruitment efforts. So we looked at the system, how is the system supporting us and how is the system not supporting us, and made some tweaks there. But then we also looked more broadly, how are we going to be able to get to a different type or a broader work pool to come into our organization? Because although we're a global organization, we're not truly recognized as a local in the bigger Twin Cities area. We are in a suburb, kind of a little bit off to the side. So, downtown people don't necessarily think about traveling out to our location, even though the commute, because I do it, is very easy. So we've talked about how we are expanding who we're looking for from a candidate pool perspective. And just one example is, we look at our referral program, and referral programs can be very enriching for an organization. And we love that we have one, and we love that we have employees that refer people to us, but we also want to make sure that we're not just repeating and bringing in ourselves, because then we're not going to grow, our organization in the way in which we want to as well. So we have looked differently at making sure that we have, multiple candidates that are looked at, that are all qualified for the jobs, and moving that forward through the organization. I think also we've had a couple of other pieces related to giving our managers some tools to have communication with their employees, because a lot of times when we think about, diversity and inclusion, people think in terms of, race and, ethnicity and so forth. And really, it's sometimes easier to talk about inclusion because it's broader and people have a tendency to gravitate toward it a little bit more. And so, one thing that COVID, I think, has helped some managers with is we are now suddenly having more open conversations with our employees about the fact that, you know, they're working from home and they've got 2 kids in the background and the dog is barking and, you know, grandma can't babysit tomorrow because, you know, she's been exposed. And, you know, I think we just really went from A to, you know, M in the alphabet of having those types of conversations, because many times managers are, you know, a little bit don't want to go deeply, but going deeply in an appropriate way is really good. You know, so I think we've been able to better understand the situation for our employees and come up with creative pieces. And so we've also implemented a tool that helps managers use that. I think I've told you before, we use a system called Quantum, and it's a system especially for small to mid-sized companies. It has recognition tools in there. It has, you know, basic pulse surveys, 360s, but it has a one-on-one tool. And so the HR team has developed, you know, 5 questions for managers to go out and ask their employees. So they give them a template to say, okay, in the next 30 days, ask your employees these questions. So they schedule a one-on-one, you know, they have a template if they can't come up with the questions themselves, that it helps talk about some of the things that are, you know, relevant right now. And again, the whole goal is to facilitate those conversations, also allow us to have a better understanding of what's going on. Those conversations are kept between the manager and the employee. It's not something that they report back to HR, but at the end, the managers can submit a survey that tells us, are they seeing any trends in something that we need to address? So some of those types of tools, I think, to really help build the communication side and the awareness for, you know, what's happened with our employees. Those regular check-ins, I think, are really important, and you know,
worth their weight in gold. I actually read a stat, you know, particularly with everything that's been going on, over 70% of employees said that nobody has checked in with them.
Yeah.
In this, right? We started this conversation by saying, check in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's so much happening right now.
Yeah. People are so busy.
Yeah, and so I love the tool that makes it easier for your leaders to actually go ahead and do that.
Yes. Yep. I think also, you know, we've done a little bit of training, you know, and I think that there's always, you know, controversy about training. Like, okay, are you just going to do training and then walk away? And, you know, as you know, Mo, that hasn't been our intent. We've pulled forward some training because we want to really develop a language within our organization. We don't want to say, okay, managers, you're all going to be trained on diversity and inclusion, and you're going to know how to manage your teams, and we're going to be better. It's really much more about the discovery process, right? And who we are as individuals, you know. And I think, you know, you and I have spoken before. You know, I'm a white woman who has, you know, grown children, and my experience is very different than, you know, perhaps some people on my team or people in the organization. So I need to, number one, understand any biases. So we've all the leaders are going through the bias disruptor and the Harvard learning piece that you had recommended to us, just so that we can see it in front of us and say, that's there, you know. And you know, to your previous points of, okay, well, let's talk about that, because it's not bad, it's just there. And so how do you figure out how to deal with that now that you know that it's there? And so, you know, doing some types of training, I think, has really helped facilitate some conversations. We've talked a little bit about, you know, what is white privilege and how does that resonate with those of us who have white privilege, you know, and what does that really mean? And I think those conversations, that training has helped bring those conversations about, and ultimately then help us decide, okay, now what are we going to do? What's next? You know, in overall strategy or planning or so forth.
So much is key in what you just said that anchors even back to that core value of uniqueness, and then to build from that, and that your team has never had a check the box, right? It's always been, here's the program, or here's the tool that allows us to have a conversation. Here's the training that allows us to have common language and conversation and build from that. So I think I love how all of the pieces that you put together are, you know, a part of this overall strategy that then, of course, I mean, I love the quote from Mike Tyson's, one of Mike Tyson's trainers, right? Everybody has a strategy until they get hit in the face. Right? And we've been hit in the face again and again and again this year. So I think it's also that I appreciate the long view that you take on this work.
Yeah. Well, I wish we could, correct everything overnight. And,
And then be done. Yeah.
yeah, and then be done, and like you and I have said, we're never done. And so it's a matter of being realistic, but not ignoring. And also knowing that, what worked for my previous organizations might not work here, but
Right.
let's at least discuss it. Let's figure it out as a team, what we want to do. How do we want to have, those conversations, and where do we want to go with it? I think, we've talked previously, you and I, that I try to take a non-traditional approach to some of the HR things, meaning I'll give guidelines, but I don't want to give you the entire program, because
Yep.
then you're doing my program, not your interpretation of the program. And that's kind of the approach that we're taking. And that's not easy, because people want you to tell you, check, 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 check. Okay, I did it, because that's just the way most of us are. So um, in particular in this era, when it is such an important and sensitive subject matter, I think we need to make sure that we give some guidelines, but we also don't frame it as Deb's D&I plan. It's raising the awareness, and then what do we want to do as a team? Because that's what makes us unique, is
Yeah.
how we work on a day-to-day basis with ourselves, our teams, and others.
Well, and really engaging, back to that, it doesn't live in HR. If you're saying, here's a framework,
Yeah.
make this yours and you're part of the organization. Ooh, we have covered a lot of ground. I always
Yeah.
love conversations with you, Deb. What's one last truth bomb you want to leave us with around creating cultures of inclusion?
Yeah, good question. I might give you two
Great.
very quickly. I think that, one is try to figure out if there is a way that you can benchmark. We do an engagement survey. We did one at the end of 2018, and we're doing another one in February. So we'll have 2 full years of data, and we're adding some specific questions related to D&I that will help us benchmark that, because you want to have some type of benchmark if you can.
Right.
Because then you can go out and you can have focus groups, and you can talk about what those results were and better understand. So one is,
Right. We measure what matters.
Yep,
right?
absolutely. And then the second one is just remember that the daily interactions that happen are really what builds, who your company is. That's the sign of what's happening in the company. It's not the once a quarter meeting or the annual meeting or the fantastic PowerPoints that we put out. It's really the interactions between each of us every single day that tells you what's happening in your organization and how inclusive you are.
That's near and dear to my heart. This is called everyday inclusion and belonging.
Yep,
Right?
yep, absolutely.
Thank you so much
You're
for all
welcome.
of you. Thanks for watching. Next week, I'm actually going to be talking with Texana Reeves, and we're going to be talking about preparing for the election and post-election as
Yes.
an organization.
Yeah,
Right?
that'll be a good topic.
And how to hold on to inclusion during that. So, Deb, thanks, and we will see all of you next week.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. Bye now.